Hey, what's up? Brother Bastone here. So before we get into the tutorial, again, I wanted to give a quick disclaimer because I think I didn't do a very good job in the first video explaining what these tutorials are actually going to contain. So basically, I'm trying to make them as sort of extensions or like add-ons to all the videos that you can find on YouTube about drawing. So I'm not taking all of those concepts that you can find in those videos, I'm not taking them from scratch. I remember myself getting to a point when I was learning how to draw where I watched all those like the drawing tutorials that I could find on YouTube, and they are extremely useful, there's no doubt about that. But when I tried to draw a human figure myself from scratch, I still couldn't do it for some reason. And I know that that stage of learning is extremely frustrating. So what I'm doing with these videos is that I'm actually trying to put myself in that spot again, like in that stage of learning again, and I'm trying to think what are the little things, like the little like the tips that I was told or that I figured out that helped me get unstuck. So I'm not taking everything from scratch, like I said. I guess there is some basic like required knowledge when watching these. So please try to take these videos more like add-ons. Like try to consider them almost like kind of like free DLC. Like if you have you have the more complete, like the more comprehensive videos, and then you have these little bits of DLC. So it's not like a full game, but maybe you will still find something interesting in them. Okay, so in the previous video, in tutorial number 1, we talked about guidelines, construction lines, the stuff that you see here, and I tried to give you a couple pointers of how to get to this point. So those points were to curve your limbs, and you can see the limbs, you can find those S curves and those C curves in the limbs. Another point was to try to keep track of your lines of symmetry. Like you can see here, they can be found in all of these construction lines. I mentioned that you should remember to overlap your muscles, and we're going to talk about that a lot more in this video. And then I showed you the different building blocks that I use for my construction lines. So building block number 1, the torso, or number 1, the head, number 2, the torso, 3, the pelvis, and then these sort of V shapes was the 4th building block. So where do we go from here? Like what is the next step? Because when you look at this is still not a completely fleshed out human figure. Like you need to add muscle and stuff on top of this. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. I'll try to give you my thought process on how I do that. Okay, so the first thing that I would focus on at this point in the drawing process, and I duplicated the guidelines so that you have one. I'm not going to touch this one, I'll only draw on this one. Like I'll polish this one so you can see the evolution between the two and what to do from this first step to get to the second one. So I like to focus, maybe you noticed during the first video, I like to focus a lot on the shoulder line. Like that's something that, I don't know why, it's like a basic point of reference in the figure to me that is really easy to find, and like I build things around that and from there. And you can see that at this point, there are many things that look kind of wrong, anatomically speaking, in the shoulder line. Mainly the fact that the way the neck connects is at this very awkward 90-degree angle, like very unrealistic angle. And then the way these V shapes connect, well, they don't really connect at all. They're just like kind of abstractly pushed into that torso, and they don't really connect in any way. So the first thing that I would do, I would try to sort of visualize how these limbs, if I imagine them as 3-dimensional objects, like how they would connect to that, like where they would connect to that torso. So for example, in this case, based on the lines of symmetry, we know that the torso is slightly turned this way, so it's not going to be like a straight line here. Like I would sort of curve, I would try to find a smooth curve to sort of start defining the shoulder here. And maybe same thing on the other side here. And again, since the torso is kind of turned away from us a little bit, it's not going to be a perfectly the same kind of line on both sides. So that already kind of gives me a more 3-dimensional view compared to this sort of very abstract V that doesn't really connect to anything. And then the next thing that I would focus on, again based on the shoulder line, would be to connect the neck in a more organic way. And we'll talk a lot more about the traps. Like these drawings here, I'm going to focus on the back. Like this is supposed to be like a back view of the torso, but and you can see those the traps a lot better from the back. But from the front, I would still sort of add a little bit this sort of triangle here on each side of the neck. That's the traps. That's the muscle that covers most of the back and that sort of wraps around to the front as well a little bit. So just having those little extra, that little volume there, makes it so that we have a much better defined shoulder now, and we have a much more natural way to connect the neck to the body here. So I'm going to start erasing stuff as well, so that you see exactly what I'm doing. And the important thing with the neck here as well, I mentioned last time that muscles always overlap. They're not next to each other, like one muscle ends and another muscle begins. You have to keep in mind that all of these muscles overlap. The order of overlap between the traps and the neck is that the neck comes in the front here. And then I would start by adding a little bit of volume maybe to the shoulders. And I try to not be afraid of like angular shapes at this point in the drawing process. And then if we imagine that this character has like a medium build with like a little bit of muscle definition, but not too much, I would start fleshing out the arms. So just from this V shape here, you see how I've already overlapped this part with the forearm, like this sort of M shape there, that line of overlapping muscles. That's already like an indication that that's where the overlap is going to happen. So I know that the biceps, for example, is going to extend a little bit into that forearm, and maybe we can draw a little bit of triceps back there, accentuate the overlap of this the forearm muscle here, and let it go up the upper arm a little bit maybe. And already just by doing that, we have a more defined arm that is starting to form. I'm trying to not give too much of that muscle definition, because this character doesn't look too muscular, but I'm also trying to make it seem like things do overlap here to some extent. And then down here, thicken the wrist a little bit maybe. And we're starting to get an arm that makes a bit more sense. But it's not going to make complete sense until we connect the shoulder muscle to the torso, because that's where a lot of the overlap happens at this point, like around the armpit basically. Like this here still looks like it's not very well connected to anything. So let's talk about, actually let's do the same thing on this side first. Okay, so there we go. We have the beginning of the arms being fleshed out a little bit more, but like I said, the real difference here is going to come when you connect the shoulders to the torso, and it feels like a sort of counterintuitive thing to say, like how what do the shoulders have to do with the torso, like the pecs, the pectoral muscles. But you can really think of both the shoulder muscles and the pecs as like one group of muscles. Like it makes it a lot easier to draw, at least. So how do we find the pecs, the pectoral muscles? So what I do is that I use the collarbones. And how do I find the collarbones? I use the tip of the shoulder muscles. It's all like, you kind of have to think about it as dominoes falling. Like you find one reference point, you start with the shoulder line, and then from there you build your shoulder muscle. You know, it looks something like this. You know that the tip of the shoulder muscle is going to be there. I should have actually left it here, like, you know, sort of draw it here. Like if the shoulder muscle is kind of shaped like that, if this is the shape of our shoulder muscle, I know that from the tip of that shoulder muscle I can draw the collarbone. That's my reference point. That's just how my mind sort of proceeds at this point when I'm drawing this. So I'll find the tip of the shoulder muscles, and from there I'll draw these sort of diagonals down to my line of symmetry here in the middle. And that gives me my collarbones. And the collarbones, the way that I see them, again, this is how I think about anatomy. I know it's not necessarily how everyone does, but you never know, someone might find some use in this and think in the same way. The collarbones, I see them as the top edge of the pectoral muscles. So anatomically, again, there's nothing, I don't think there's anything connecting the pectoral muscles to the collarbones. But when you draw them, that's just what it looks like. It looks like the pectoral muscles extend from the collarbone to wherever you draw them. And again, it's not exactly wherever you draw them. There is a precise point and there is a precise way that I choose to place these. But let me just try to get them to look like decent pecs first, and I'll explain exactly how I find this placement. So maybe something like this. Okay, so how do I find the displacement? I told you in last week's video, in the tutorial number 1, that this line is the bottom of the ribs. It represents, like, it sort of symbolizes the bottom of the ribs. The most useful thing that I was ever told about the anatomy, the muscle structure of the torso, was that the first 2 abs, like the top abs of your your 4 pairs of abs, the first 2 sit on the bottom of the rib cage. And I said last week I use this line for a bunch of things, to place a bunch of things, and in future videos I'm going to be using this line again as a point of reference to draw other things. This is one of those things. When I'm drawing my pecs, when I'm drawing these lines, I'm thinking I need to leave some space here, enough space for 1 pair of abdominal muscles. So that's how I place my pecs. I find the tip of the shoulder here, tip of the shoulder muscle. I draw the collarbones from there, and then I look at my bottom line for the ribs, and I know I need to place some abs here. So in between the collarbone and in between that bottom line of the ribs, that gives me basically the placement for the pecs, like this. And as you can see immediately, just by adding the pecs, it seems like the arms are connected to the torso in a much more natural way. And that is because I'm overlapping, like this line here, I'm overlapping the pec over the biceps here. And it's all about overlap, and we're going to talk a lot more about that here when we go over the muscles in the armpit here, because that's where the overlap is the most obvious. But just like, for example, let me just erase these lines. You see how I erase the overlap between the pecs and the arms, and suddenly it doesn't look right. If I just overlap the pectoral muscles over the biceps, it looks right again. And when I said that you think of the shoulder muscle, so like this muscle here and the pectoral muscle, this muscle here, like this whole thing as one muscle group. That's because that's where like the armpit and that biceps area and the point where the pectoral muscle overlaps with all that stuff, that's where the connection is most visible, the connection of the arm to the torso. So if you separate the shoulder muscle somehow from the pecs, it's going to start looking like, again, the arm is kind of separated from the torso. So that's my basic way of doing like that whole part around the shoulder line. And again, you have to think about it like dominoes falling. You find one thing, and then you find the next thing. So for example, here I'll expand the shoulder muscle. When I've expanded the shoulder muscle, I've found the tip of the shoulder muscle. That means that I found the collarbone. When I found the collarbone, I look at the bottom of the ribs. That means that I found the pecs, and so on and so forth. It's all like, there is a process to it. You can really think about it as like a sequence of events that you can repeat, because when you get to this point with your construction line, sometimes you just don't know what to do. Like I remember that stage when I couldn't draw figures from imagination. It's because I didn't have a process, I didn't have a method for it. So this is my method, and this is the sort of reference points that I use to make it a lot easier for myself. Okay, so at this point still I have not lost the line of symmetry here of the torso. So next thing that I would do is that I would place that one pair of abdominal muscle, like that one pair of abs, that rest on the bottom of the rib cage. And very often I find myself not even drawing any other abs than this pair of abs here. I think, I don't know, at least on male characters. On female characters it's a little bit different, because this area tends to be covered by the breasts very often. But even if you only just draw, sorry, I'm losing my voice, even if you only just draw this one pair of abs here, it already kind of makes the character look, well, not muscular, but at least not like he doesn't have abs at all. So after that, like I said, I don't like to. I should probably add the belly button here while we're on the abdominal area, maybe right there. I like to focus a lot more, instead of focusing on the abs here, I like to focus a lot more on these muscles back here. So you have the the lats here. You can sort of, if you want to make your character look very muscular, you can sort of pop them out a little bit. And we'll talk about those later when we do the back view. So we can just add a little bit more volume here for the lats. So it's a little bit difficult to explain exactly what's going on there, but the way that I imagine it is that I try to picture the line, like the edge of the lats, like the latissimus muscle, coming from inside the armpit pretty much and wrapping around the back here. And if you see when we'll talk about the back later, it actually wraps all the way, like coming from the armpit to the side here, and like all the way down to the lower back down here. But I try to imagine that line, but I don't actually draw that line. What I do instead is that on that line I'll start drawing this sort of pattern of overlapping small muscles. But the pattern itself is what's important here, because it directly shows the overlap. So it's a little bit difficult to see here, and I'm trying to, even the way that I drew it here is, they're a little bit too big, I think. But if I draw the pattern of overlap, I'm basically like, you have the line of the lats, and from under there I'm pulling one muscle and sort of connecting it here with those first abs. And then I'll draw another muscle that sort of goes under this first one. You kind of have to imagine the volume of each muscle And then from this one, I'll pull another one from under this one, and I'll bulge it out, and I'll extend it, and you can sort of imagine the volume of that muscle, same thing. And under that one, I'll push another one under this first one. So you get this pattern of like overlapping and interlocking muscles. And it's a perfect example of the whole idea of overlap that I've been talking about, that I was talking about in last week's video as well. So the last thing that I would do with this curve, like this, the bottom of the abs, the bottom of the ribcage curve that we've been using for a bunch of stuff, is that sometimes I'll draw, especially on female characters, and we'll see when we go over this one later, but sometimes I'll draw like from the lower sort of tips of that curve, like if you find the lowest points, like those angles of that curve, like from there I sort of draw like just a quick indication like this to show me where the abdominal wall is. Like basically this whole area, this area here, like maybe extending to just above the pelvis here, plus these two abs up here. That's your abs, your abdominal muscles. And sometimes in some situations it kind of helps me to have these lines as a reference point for that abdominal wall, especially if the character is sort of if the torso is kind of bending a little bit. Bending this whole shape is easier than trying to find some place where to bend the torso in this completely empty abstract space. So sometimes I'll add these guidelines as well, but they're not like completely necessary. And then we're getting to the pelvis. So we've extended the abdominal wall, like this thing, all the way down to the pelvis now. And from here there aren't much really like I tend to not add much muscle definition around the pelvis or even around the legs, to be honest. But if I add anything, I'll add like that sort of V shape that comes from that especially males have, that comes from the lowest abs. Like if you have like your 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the last pair of abs, like it kind of extends a little bit further down here, like they're kind of longer, these two abdominal muscles, this one here and this one here. And they create that the bottom of those abs kind of creates that V shape here around the legs, where the legs connect to the pelvis, like these lines, these two lines particularly. So if I'm going to add any sort of muscle definition around this area, I would probably do it around that V shape there, and we can start to gradually erase some of our guidelines. So now let's talk about how the legs connect to the pelvis, because it's very tempting if you use the guidelines that we talked about last week, the circles, like we have our 3 circles here. It's very tempting to just connect them, to just pull the legs out of those circles. And as long as you're doing it with the construction lines like I've done here, that's fine. It's just construction lines. But now that we're sort of trying to refine this anatomy a little bit more, we need to get rid of that. So what you need to remember is that the legs actually extend further up than just these circles. Like these circles represent the pelvic structure, but the legs themselves, like the leg muscles and stuff, they don't really care about that kind of structure, and they extend past those points. Like some of those muscles do attach to the bones on the pelvis, but some of them extend, like they wrap around and they extend higher up. Like the way the legs connect to the to the torso. It flows much more naturally, and you need to find these kind of longer curves to make it seem like the connection is more natural than just V shapes coming out of disc shapes. Okay, there we go. I think that's enough construction lines erased. So I added just a little barely visible lines for the rest of the abs. I accentuated the V shape of the crotch here, like above the around the last abs a little bit, and then I added just a little bit of a bulge here on the side, like the muscles that sort of lead into this V shape. I think they're called the obliques, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong with that. That's pretty much it for the top of the body. For the legs, I really don't detail the muscle definition of the legs very much ever. So my knowledge about legs and like the muscles involved is like very minimal. The best advice that I've ever seen that helped me to understand how to draw legs is that you can basically break them down into like two opposite curves, like you have and like two muscle groups. Like there are tons of muscles in the thigh, but you can sort of break them down into two groups, and they sort of crisscross each other in like opposite directions. So the first one would be like this sort of big group of muscles, like this whole thing that goes from the pelvis up there into the knee. Like that's one big V shape, and that's really what you're drawing when you're using this V shape building block. So if you draw your first V shape curved this way into the kneecap, that's like one muscle group. And then you have another group of muscles here on the inside that curves in the opposite direction. So if you have your first V shape like this, just by adding this little shape on the inside of the thigh and sort of making it seem like it overlaps again, like it goes under that first shape, like this is a pretty natural building block for the thigh. So it's like one curve outward, almost like a straight line in the inside, and then another curve in the opposite direction on the inside. And that's basically your two muscle groups for the thigh. So that's what I'm trying to do here. I actually already kind of added the inner curve here on the guidelines. I should have just left it the V shape without this, but from that sort of construction here, I would add this inner curve. On the inside of the thigh. And the rest for the legs, I mean the legs are like super complex. They're a super complex part of the body, and I probably do not give them the attention that they deserve when I'm drawing them usually. But the rest is just about like sort of fleshing out the calf muscle. So when I think about the calf muscles, when you see the calf from behind, like if you can imagine the back of the calf from this angle, it's basically like two sort of bulbs kind of shaped like this, and that's why it's sort of they protrude on each side like that, or on the back like that. I would start this with the V shape, the building block that we talked about last time, and then sort of just pull these calf muscles from behind the knee. Like I really emphasize that shape, the kneecap, on purpose. So I start from behind there, and I pull them out, and then I curve them back in. And like the way you stylize your calves is really up to you, like how angular, how prominent you want them to be, or do you just want them to be little barely visible bumps on the leg. Like the kneecap is mostly for construction purposes. Like obviously you don't want that to look super visible at the end. You do want to flesh out the sides of the kneecap though. Like if you look at legs, usually there is a little bump of flesh, like a little curvature of flesh around the kneecap, even in like really thin legs. So just adding that little extra bump there, just extend these lines a little bit so it still looks like the thigh comes in front of the calf. So I hope that seeing that entire thought process in real time, coming from this to this, it gives you like a better idea of how it really is like there is a method to it. Like I said, it feels like dominoes falling. Like you find the shoulder line, you find the shoulder muscle, that makes you find the collarbone, the bottom of the ribs helps you find the pectoral muscles. The pectoral muscles overlap with the arms, and that helps you connect into the armpit better. And from the armpit you draw the lats, and from under the lats you draw these little muscles, and then you find the abdominal wall, and you sort of extend that in a fluid motion into the crotch. And then it all falls together. You go from one reference point to another with a methodical approach, and then once you have that method, you can pretty much draw any pose. And like once you have these building blocks and this method, you can draw any pose from imagination. And I wanted to end on these two things here real quick. So the back and then the armpit. And I tried to make this look like a female figure, so we can talk again about the abdominal wall and how it curves into the crotch a lot more with female figures. So let's start with the back. So the way that I think about the back is extremely simple. There's tons of all kinds of complicated muscles in the back. I only care about two of them, or three of them I should say. The traps that we already talked about here, the lats that we talked about here, and then the shoulder muscles, because the shoulder, like deltoid, the shoulder muscle, the deltoid is actually kind of more further back. There's more of it in the back than there is in the front. So let me show you what I mean. And so first thing that we would do here, we have our shoulder line and we have our neck. This 90-degree angle is very unnatural. It doesn't flow organically at all. So we need to add our little bump for the lats. But from this angle, this bump is actually, like we can actually see what volume of muscle it represents. So if we draw the entire muscle, it would be shaped kind of like this. It would curve in the back, and then it kind of follows. Let's draw just a little line here for the spine. It kind of goes into this sort of butterfly shape on each side of the spine. Like it's that kind of shape. That's the tiny little triangle that you see from the front. It actually covers this whole area from the back, and it actually extends even up the neck a little bit. So it's a huge muscle. I like to think of this like the lats, the traps, as the pecs of the back. Like the way the pecs sort of overlap with the shoulder muscle, the lats do this. The traps, like this big thing, do the same thing in the back with the shoulder muscle. So let's try to imagine extend the shoulder muscle here, the deltoid from this side, and it sort of comes all the way back here, and you can see why it sort of overlaps. Actually, I'm extending it too far. I tend to forget that the building block that I use here it actually already takes into account the shoulder line. Like this is not the rib cage, so I'm extending it way too far. So you get this sort of shape. And this is very reminiscent of what's going on in the front of the body. Like I was saying earlier, thinking of the shoulder muscle here and the pectoral muscle here as one thing helps you draw it in a much more simplified way. So it's kind of the same thing with the shoulder muscle in the back and the traps in the back. Like if you think of this whole thing as one block, it makes it immediately much easier to draw. But all of your characters are not going to be super muscular characters with super developed shoulder muscles and traps. So to simplify it, the most useful thing that I ever heard was from a tutorial by Jim Lee, who said that he thinks of the back muscles as Y shapes. And it took me a while to understand exactly what he means, because in that video he drew it really quickly. But what he means is that you don't need to define like everything in the back. If you just define the lower edge of the traps here, the traps, and then the sort of line that goes into the shoulder muscle here. Let's just draw the shoulders here and pull out from under. Like I said, it's always about overlapping. Like the pecs overlap with the shoulder muscles here. The traps overlap the shoulder muscles here. So you pull the shoulder muscle, the deltoid, from under that trap, and this is what gives you the Y shapes. It's like the letter Y. Like the way he did it, it was even, I'm talking about Jim Lee, the way that he drew it was even more simple. Like he just drew, like really quickly drew something like this and something like this, and like maybe some definition here around the neck to extend the traps, like make it look like the traps overlap with the neck here. But you can kind of, this Y shape is a very easy way to remember what you're drawing. So what you're drawing is, like I said, the bottom of this muscle, of the traps, and then the beginning of the shoulder muscle, the deltoid, coming out from under there. So let's try to put that together really quickly into a very, very simplified and stylized view of the back. So if we add a little bit of muscle definition there, where the trap overlaps here with the shoulder muscle, then we draw like that lower edge of the traps, trying to curve it in like a more pleasant way. Here, same thing. I know that in the previous tutorial, some people seem to hate the fact that I was redrawing the same lines many times. So I'm trying to not do that now as much, but I think I'm failing. Okay, so that, and then from under there, we pull the shoulder muscle, and then we would have our arm there. We can add a little bit of volume here on the inside, where the lats wrap around, but this time you can actually see them wrap around all the way to the lower back. So this is the other tiny bit of muscle definition that I would add on the back. Kind of imagine the lats sort of coming from under the armpit here, and then wrapping around the torso, and this is the line that you see, like they come from down inside there, they wrap around, and then they attach like here somewhere in the lower back. So that's why I said like there's 3 muscles that I care about in the back, even though there's tons of them that actually exist. I care about the shoulder muscle, the traps, and then the lats that sort of wrap around there. That's the only thing really that you need to remember about the back, I think, to create well, if you're going for like a realistic figure drawing style, obviously you would need to know all the muscles and stuff, but I'm only trying to draw like comic style stuff. I don't really care too much. I can stylize things. So then you have the arms coming out of those shoulder muscles, and then here these lines are not visible, and this is really important because, like we said, when we're talking about the neck in the front, there is again an overlap, like the neck overlaps comes in front of the traps. So when you're looking at the neck from behind, it's the opposite. It's the traps that come in front of the neck. So you need to extend these lines into the neck a little bit, and you can see immediately what kind of difference it makes. But yeah, that was my my general point for back muscles. Okay, and last point really quickly, or a couple points on these construction lines here. I wanted to talk about the use of the abdominal wall, like this this shape that I showed you earlier. The use of that in female figures, and how I think it's very important to define that when you're drawing female characters. It's because the female figure in general, it's much more curvy, like it flows much more, and finding the flow from this line, like the bottom line of the ribs, into the abs, into the crotch, and all the way behind like this, and then into the back, like this kind of flow is really important. And finding these 2 points to find the places where that abdominal wall is pulled out from, I think is very useful. At least to me it has been very useful. So that is something that I would keep in mind with female figures, curving the abdominal wall all the way around to like the crotch, basically. Okay, there we go. So that was my first point. It's not as useful. Like I tried to show it here with this male torso, but it's kind of the more angular shapes, and then the crotch obviously is also bulging out differently. But with female abdomens, like it flows much more naturally. So that was my first point, and then I just wanted to demonstrate here the overlap of muscles with a raised arm. Because things like the armpit can be very, very difficult sometimes to draw. And it all comes from the fact that there is such an overlap of muscles. It all comes from the overlap. So just like with our basic method that we used here, I would start with our shoulder line. Since this is like a female character, I would maybe curve the traps a little bit. Like I wouldn't make them as angular, as prominent here. And then I would go into the shoulder muscle here that is pushed up because the arm is raised up. And then we need to think about our order of overlap of muscles. So you just need to remember that the pecs in the front overlap over everything, just like the traps in the back overlap over everything. So that's the first thing that we need to find. So same method as here. I'm trying to find the tip of the shoulder muscle, draw my collarbone from here down to the center here. So the pectoral muscle would extend like to somewhere like here, but this time, since it's pulled up and we know that it's over everything else, it's going to be pulled all the way up like this, over all the way to the shoulder. And just like we were doing here, visualizing the shoulder muscle and the pectoral muscle as one single thing, that's what we're doing here. This is the pec, and then this is the shoulder muscle, but we're pretty much drawing it as one single thing. So at that point, we know that next in the overlap, in the stack of overlapping muscles, is the first muscle of the arm, so basically the biceps here. But where do we actually draw it here? Like, it's not going to be just floating there. But we know that muscles overlap and interlock, and we need to draw muscles from under other muscles. So easy, what we do here is that we draw that from under our pec. We pull that out of there and into our arm, and that gives us our biceps roughly. And then what's next in the overlap? So we have pec on top of biceps on top of what? Next is this thing here coming from out from under the armpit. It's the lats. So the lats come from under, and again I'm pulling the lats from under another muscle. This time it's the biceps. So you see how once you understand that it's overlapping muscles everywhere, everything becomes extremely, well, not easy, but it becomes much easier. You're basically pulling muscles from under other muscles. So here I'm pulling the lats from under there, and we know that they wrap around the body and the lower back. So we're curving them around the lower back here. And then on top of that, we have the triceps here. Well, in this case, since this is not like a super muscular person, I don't think we would see much of it. But basically, that comes on top of the lats, and you can imagine if we were to imagine how the shoulder muscle extends behind the arm here, then the shoulder muscle comes on top of the triceps on the other side here. So it's all overlapping stuff. I don't know, like when I understood that, when I finally got that idea that you're pulling muscles from under other muscles, it really helped me. So that's why I'm trying to accentuate, to really emphasize that fact as much as possible, because maybe it will help someone else. And all you have to do when you know that it's overlapping muscles, all you have to do is remember the order of overlap. So pec over biceps over traps over triceps. And that's pretty much it. From the side, from the front, from everywhere, it's always the same order. And if we look from the back, like it's the traps over the deltoid over the triceps, etc. And then you go into the same muscles here. So that's pretty much it for this tutorial number 2. If you have any thoughts, any questions, any feedback, good or bad, let me know in the comments, and stay tuned for tutorial number 3 coming soon on a different subject. Also check out all the links in the description below if you want to see more art. There's Twitter, Instagram, ArtStation, it's all there. We also have a Discord if you want to discuss art related stuff, or if you want to give feedback or receive feedback, you can come join us there. The link is also in the description, and yeah, thanks for watching. If you would like to support this channel and help me make more videos, check out this Patreon link on screen right now, or in the description below, where you can get all of my PSD files as well as real-time versions of all my videos.